Welcome back, adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today we begin our journey into the fundamental game design principles found in Jessie Schell's book, The Art of Game Design. Jessica Sliwinski, a lead narrative designer at Something Wicked Games, joins me as we tackle 4 randomly selected lenses from the book. With lead narrative design positions at Tilting Point and Instructor Beam, senior writing roles on a variety of licensed games from Star Wars to SpongeBob, and skills forged in the crucible of industry giants like Zynga and BioWare, Jessica's expertise is unmatched. Her creative contributions have left a mark on beloved games such as Star Wars: The Old Republic and Star Trek Timelines. So let's dig in. Jessica, thank you for joining me. Jessica, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I love the concept of this podcast, and you had just this rogues gallery of amazing guests. I feel like kind of weird, but also awesome that I'm going to be listed among them on your bake.
I love the term rogues gallery. I'm totally stealing that and going to apply that now. So before we get into what we're here to talk about, and you are the first guest on my series of the lenses from the Art of Game Design. I have talked to Jessie Schell in a previous episode, and he kind of introduced this little mini-series for me. But before we get going, can you just kind of ground the conversation for me with a bit of your personal history, how you got into gaming, how you fell in love with games, how you got to where you are today, kind of just your origin story?
Yeah. So I got into gaming as a hobby as a kid, and my route was primarily PC computer games. The old point-and-click adventure games of the 80s and 90s, primarily Sierra and LucasArts. I was like 10 years old. We had a 386 Packard Bell. We'd go to Micro Center on the weekends and pick up new games for it. And I realize if you have younger listeners, this probably all sounds like word salad, but all these things were real. I promise. They're not real anymore, but they were. I loved Quest for Glory, Space Quest, King's Quest, Eco Quest, pretty much anything with a quest in the name. I'd probably buy it or beg my parents to buy it. But even the more obscure ones that those 2 particular studios would do, like Freddy Farkas, Frontier Pharmacist. You ever heard of that one?
No, that one I do not know.
It is a fun game where you're an ex-gunslinger who decides to become a pharmacist in the Old West, and it's so much fun if you can find it somewhere. I think on like several like abandonware sites, every good old games. I can't remember, but if you can find it, it's a fun play. Or The Dig, if you remember that one.
That one I remember.
Yeah, I seem to be one of the 5 people on Earth who played The Dig, but I did love it.
Pretty obscure, yep.
Yeah. But, as a kid, I didn't have the language to really describe like why I love these games so much, and I just knew they were fun. But now that I'm older and I've actually made a career of making games in the spirit of those, now I kind of understand that I was just blown away by the experience of getting to play an active role and in telling a story, and in a lot of cases help decide where it goes. And that's a kind of like collaborative, interactive effort that you can't experience with storytelling and other kinds of media. And I'm still blown away by it. And that's what eventually led me to decide I wanted to try and do it for a living. And as to how I got into my career, I always had the games as a hobby. I always liked writing. And I went to the College of Worcester in Ohio. I graduated with a degree in English. I didn't even know at the time that the job I have now was a job. Like I thought that everyone who made a video game had to be a programmer, and they just happened to be a programmer who did all the other stuff too. And I took a couple intro courses in college, but I quickly was like, I don't enjoy this. I'm not really great at it. I don't really want to do it. So I just sort of assumed I can't work in games. I'll just keep enjoying them because I thought everybody had to know how to program. And so I graduated, and I was applying for a lot of pretty boring sounding jobs in publishing, like copy editing technical manuals and stuff like that. So trying to get my foot in there because that was kind of my big plan. I was gonna like get into publishing and eventually hopefully move on to editing and helping out with like fiction things and in that way and to get my writing interest in. And I was looking at websites, just browsing one day, and I saw that BioWare, which was one of my favorite company's favorite games, was hiring writers. And I'm reading the job description and I'm like scanning it and I'm reading over to make sure I'm right. I'm like, it doesn't say you need to know how to program. And that just sort of like blew my mind. I was like, wait, I can do this? I don't have to code? Like, and so and I'm very grateful now for it, but I also kind of cringe at like the complete ignorance and confidence of use. I decided I'll apply for this. Even though like it's BioWare. And I had never worked on a game ever. I had never even written professionally ever. But you know, that's young people that you don't know what you don't know. So I applied. I remember I sent in both the copy through the website, and then I got really paranoid for some reason. I had no reason to feel paranoid, but I got really paranoid for some reason that they somehow were going to receive it. So I also burned a copy onto the only disc I had at the time, which was a little mini CD disc. They used to make those, if you remember, like little, I called as much data, but they were like physically smaller. And it was themed SpongeBob SquarePants. And it was left over from high school. And it was the only one I had around. So again, the complete ignorance of you not thinking like, what does this say about me? That I'm going for tiny SpongeBob CD. But I just thought, that's the one I have. I'll just burn my application onto it. And I put that all, in a middle envelope. I sent the physical application to Edmonton because Edmonton was the one. My job ended up being in Austin, but Edmonton was the one taking the application at Tech. And then I heard back again to my complete surprise, and they said, "Oh yeah, we got your manila envelope. We never saw an electronic thing." So I guess my random paranoia must have been the universe telling me like, "You better do this because your other things get lost." Because they did end up never getting the electronic application for some reason. They just got that manila envelope with my little SpongeBob. Yeah, and to my eternal shock, even now, they hired me right out of school to work on the Old Republic, and that's how I got in. And yeah, it's been a great career so far. I'm very, very lucky, very grateful, and hoping to keep going.
I'm curious because I'm always curious about BioWare stuff. When you applied, was it just a standard like applying for a job, or were you part of the wave where you had to do build something in the Aurora tool set to show that you could?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, you had to at the time get your hands on the Neverwhere Nights tool set, and you had to build a module in it. Now, for writers, they said over and over and over again, they said, you don't have to script. You don't have to script a quest. Just plop down a line of NPCs, book the conversations up to them in the order you want me to, and I'll just go down the line and plop it.
Yeah.
Well, of course, everybody is like thinking they need to read between the lines, like, oh no, they really do want me to script to like impress them. And so I, like so many other first applicants to BioWare, like you actually had to do 3 modules throughout the application process at that time. Mm-hmm. And the first one, I followed the rules as much out of like, I was completely new to the tool set as just wanting to follow the rules. And then the second one, I tried to do the thing everyone does, and I tried to script it. And of course, like there were 80 ways to break it that I didn't know about because I didn't know what I didn't know. And then, the hiring manager was like, no, I really need it. Just put them in a line. I was like, oh, okay. Did that again. But yeah, at that time, you had to build a module. It was not there was a barrier to entry then.
Yeah. But you got through. You passed.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we dig into the lenses, we're going to talk about, is there any other, between the start and getting to where you are now at Something Wicked, is there any other fun little things that have happened along the way that you'd like to share?
Oh my gosh. So many. I spent several years at BioWare on the Old Republic, which was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'm so happy that game is still going, which I think is a testament to all the hard work we did on it. there were many times where I was like, oh, this game's going down for whatever reason, and with a Disney acquisition, and all sorts of things. And I was like, this game's not long for the world. I'm sad, but it's still here, and it's amazing. It's neat. Right. And I've not been that lucky because I've worked on a number of games that aren't alive anymore, which is the downside of live service games. Once they go away, they're gone. So, but it's funny. I didn't like set out in my career saying like, making a specific goal, like I really want to work on licensed games. It just happened to be like a trick of how my career has gone, and I've gotten to work on a lot of licensed games, like Star Wars, Star Trek, Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, Archer, SpongeBob, stuff that never came out, like Doctor Doing, Mortal Engines. But yeah, I've been very lucky that they're all like huge franchises that I personally appreciate. And getting to play in those worlds was fun. I do have fun stories though. Like one time I was communicating with the licensor about content for The Walking Dead, and when you work on a licensed game, you have to send people everything you make for them to review and approve and make sure that it is in line with how they view the property. And I'm sort of weirdly proud of this. I sent something to The Walking Dead people and then sent it back, but I'm paraphrasing, but basically they told me it was too depressing.
For The Walking Dead.
Yeah. So I had the distinction of The Walking Dead people, the people who did look at the flowers and all of that. Yeah, I am still depressing. So I have a weird little bench of pride I have, and also I was like, it makes one look inward where you're like, is there something wrong with me? Should I talk to someone? Wow. Adventures in licensed gaming down. Yeah, lots of fun stuff there. Star Trek, I've had the privilege of working with John Delancey, the actor who plays Q. He wanted to really get involved with the development, so we used to spend like Saturdays on the phone together talking about the storylines of that game. And that was just a wonderful experience because everybody who's involved in making something creative, even if they don't do exactly what you do on a regular basis, has so many awesome lessons and things to teach you about the storytelling process, angles that you didn't consider because you're not in that discipline. So that was fantastic. And I'm happy to say we still sometimes talk on Saturdays, and that makes me very happy. And I don't really know why, but I'm happy that he's still willing to talk to me on some Saturdays.
Well, obviously you're cool, and he just wants to hang out. Yeah, obvious. Okay, we're gonna move on to the lenses, but before we do, I know you can't talk about it because it's in process, it's in development. But just because I love to plug it, you're currently working on Weird Song at Something Wicked Games, which is Chef's Kiss. Looks so good. I can't wait. But we won't talk about it. I just wanted to mention it before we move on.
Yeah.
That's where you are now.
Yeah, I am. I'm very excited. And like you said, I can't say too much, or at least not any more than Jeff and Will did on previously. But I will say that everyone working there is very excited, that it's not usual for new studios to sort of announce projects early in the way that Jeff did with the trailer. But we're also glad he did because it just got so many of us like so excited, like I gotta work on that, and everyone's just so passionate about the project. And we're really excited to hopefully share more in the future.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll put a pin in that. Moving on. So the first lens we're going to talk about today, the lens of the essential experience. So that's where we're going to start. So, and we're going to come at this from kind of a holistic point of view. So game design and narrative design, writing and mechanics. But you are a narrative designer, so feel free to come at it from your point of view, and that's fine. That's cool. So for you, Jessica, how do you determine the essential experience that players should have when you're starting the design process for a new game?
Yeah, so first, let me start out by, I really do want to compliment you on doing a series centered around this book, The Art of Game Design by Jessica Sliwinksi. It's this book, no pun intended, it was a real game changer for me.
Oh, that pun was intended.
Well, maybe a little intense. When I read it, and I think it should be required reading for anybody aspiring to work in game design, but particularly narrative designers or game writers who, and I think I can speak from experience here. I think we tend to have a greater danger of thinking, all I need to know about is words. And even if nobody ever asked you to do anything other than write words, the more you know about game design as a discipline, the better all of your words are going to be. So, yeah, so that's my quick plug to everyone. It's a great book. So, the lens of essential experience. Another way that narrative tends to ask ourselves this question is, what's the core fantasy here? To use some of the examples that are in the book, is the fantasy being a baseball player? Is it being a secret agent? Other games like Rock Band, is it being a rock star? Like Freddy Frontier Pharmacist, is it being a pharmacist in the Old West? What is the fantasy? And it's important to know, like, every game has a fantasy. It's not just story-based games. There's an essential experience to every type of game. Like, if you take Pong, what's the fantasy of Pong? Defend my turf, invade someone else. Like, there's still a fantasy there. You just gotta find what it is. So for us, the first step is defining it, figuring out what is that core fantasy. And then once we have that, we analyze the heck out of it. What is essential to the fantasy of being a pharmacist in the Old West? Well, at some point, I'd better fill some prescriptions because I'm a pharmacist. I'm in the Old West, so they should probably include like weird, potentially fatal ingredients or maladies and conditions we don't have anymore, or we now know by a different name. If I'm in the Old West, maybe someone should challenge me to a shootout at some point, so I know I'm going to need shootout stuff. All things like that. What are the components that go into the fan? And once you've identified those key aspects of the fantasy, you can start to then say, okay, how am I best going to ensure the player can live out that fantasy? And not that narrative folks or most people on the ground necessarily have a ton of control over this, but this is where the genre and platform of your game, like, can really make or break the success of the game. Like, you could make a tabletop role-playing game about being an airline pilot. You can. No, it won't stop you. But that genre and platform are never going to embody the core fantasy of being an airline pilot, as well as using an actual controller that is as similar to a yoke or the stick as possible, where you can simulate the same kind of movements that actual pilots have to make when they're flying the plane. So I think a lot of times people don't think too hard about that aspect. You know, they try to put the square peg in the round hole, and you really got to back up and think, like, what is this fantasy? What are the parts of it? And what is the best way to achieve representation and the experience of that fantasy? So, you know, to kind of sum up how we approach this lens, we choose the experience, we define the experience, and then we set about capturing the experience.
I'm curious, is something that sparks my brain because of conversations I've had recently. The idea of making a tabletop role-playing game around being an airline pilot, but I totally agree that's not the best way to capture the true experience. Could you use a tabletop role-playing game, a stripped-down version, to play test a slice of a video game you're building for airline? Like, you're building a game for airline, but could you use tabletop to play test parts of it? And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, paper prototypes, what we typically call them, are used all the time by particularly system designers. They'll just literally, it's a little harder now that we're when you're remote, because you can't like actually go in the room and move people around. But yeah, when I worked in offices, those were very typical, where the designer would call a meeting and say, I've got a paper prototype of this system, and we all go in the room and we literally try and play it with paper. And if it's fun with the paper, that usually means probably going to be way more fun once it's actually in a game and digitized and everything. So yeah, absolutely. You can use that as a form of testing out, like, well, am I getting sort of the flow and cycle of this?
Have you ever seen it used to test narrative elements, like a paper?
We haven't, I personally have not encountered that using paper, just because I think it's just as fast to type it as it is to. So like,
No, I'm just curious.
On paper, it's actually almost more time to write it on paper because you have to cut up all the paper and in addition to writing that. So I think more often we will prototype stuff like in a graph-based tool like Twine or something, and you call that the prototype, and you hop around that to be like, does this narrative flow right? Do I have enough spots to chime in? Do I have appropriate choices? And if you feel you do, then you like go through all the work of making it playable and an actual character saying it and all that. But yeah, I haven't personally encountered using paper for narrative. Now, I think where it could be super useful as opposed to the actual like flow conversations is the flow of branching quests and branching choices. I could see that being super useful, especially when they get very complicated. So yeah, I like it. I haven't personally experienced that, but I can absolutely see that's a valid way to do it, and certainly what people do in system design. So
I was just curious. Okay, can you share an example? Have you had an experience in the past where putting that essential experience first somehow heavily influenced the design, whether narrative design or mechanical design or any element?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to get this out of the way, a lot of my examples will be from games I've worked on, and this isn't because I'm trying to plug all of them, but it's just because I can speak more authoritatively to them because I worked on them.
Please.
So for this example, I want to use Star Trek Timelines, which is a mobile game that you can still play. They're a little bit of a book, but the core fantasy of Star Trek Timelines is, what if I could command the multiverse of Star Trek? All the captains, all the crew, all the guest stars, what's essential to that experience? There will need to be a reason the whole multiverse is available to me, some kind of inciting incident or crisis that gives me reason to recruit them all to my cause, make them all willing to come to my cause and work together, and for them to accept my authority. I'll need a ship or a starbase to put them on. I don't just want to have them, I want to command them. So I need something to command them to do. I'm going to need missions to send them. So we've chosen the experience. I want to command the multiverse of Star Trek. We've defined the experience. I need a reason they're all with me and listening to me. I need a ship. I need things for them to do. Then we were starting to try to capture the experience. Now, at first, we did what you should not do. We tried to put the square peg in the round. Our game prior to Star Trek Timeline was a game called Game of Thrones Ascent. Now, Game of Thrones Ascent, it was the first game based on Game of Thrones, the HBO show. And it was a great game that fit its own fantasy, which was to manage your own house of Westeros. But we quickly found that the design for that game did not fit the fantasy of Star Trek Timeline. Our plan was to basically just reskin. But then, we went to do that, and we're like, this doesn't work, because Game of Thrones Ascent was a game about building your house, building your holdings, building all that building power and strategizing against other players, other houses. The fantasy of Star Trek Timelines is about commanding people to do things, more action-oriented, and recruiting them, or to use another verb, collecting them. Mm-hmm. And Game of Thrones Ascent was not built to support those verbs. It was built to support completely different verbs that were appropriate for that game, but these are different verbs. So we pivoted. Star Trek Timelines became a CCRPG, or character collector role-playing game. And we found that this genre supported the fantasy much better, because the core loop of a CCRPG is collect the characters, send them out to do things, keep leveling them up with them for combinations, and that just fit our core fantasy of I want to command the whole multiverse and mash them all up together and have crews that Spock and Worf and O'Brien and everybody all mashed together, and it just fit it so much better. And it was way more work because, the original impulse for basically risking a game with ourselves was to save ourselves the work. And this was the first CCRPG we're building, so we had to build it from scratch. But Star Trek Timelines is a mobile game. It's still running. It's 8 years old, which means it has been running longer than any actual Star Trek series is aired.
That's true.
So I think we made the right choice, and it's worth that.
Well done. So I'm also curious, once you've got that essential experience identified and you're working and designing towards it, what methods have you seen to ensure that it remains consistent throughout the whole dev cycle?
Yeah. First, you have to document it to keep everybody honest. If you don't write it down, memory is a funny thing. It's not almost never malicious, but human beings are just very good at interpreting and remembering things how they want to, as opposed to what they actually were or are. And if you don't write it down at the start and collectively agree that yes, this is the essential experience, it leads to miscommunication and confusion later, because everybody ends up with their own memory of what the essential experience was supposed to be and thinks that, yeah, I'm hitting it. And I was already, no, that's not it. You're not hitting it. And you're shit. Everybody's confused. So first, you write it down.
Right.
Secondly, you try to constantly be checking against that definition. How do we define it? Constantly check it against it. Am I fitting it? Am I doing it? And I find that the best way to do that is not to just say like, oh yeah, we'll do that, because you never do it. You have to integrate that constant checking into your process. On my current project, Weird Song, it's something Wiki Games, we've actually got a section in some of our narrative documentation that requires you to answer how and why this piece of content hits our game pillars, hits the essential experience. And the act of doing that, sometimes it feels like, it feels a roach, it feels annoying. You're like, why are you making me do this for every single thing I'm doing? But the act of doing it really forces you to consider whether this piece of content is meeting that essential experience or hitting those pillars. Mm-hmm. And if while you're filling that section out, you find that it isn't, or you're contorting yourself to find reasons why it fits, that tells you very on at the documentation stage, before you even produce a piece of content, that tells you very early on, this isn't going to fit. I should rethink it or revise it. And that way you catch it, long before it's an actual playable living thing with art and VO and everything. It is way too late to be like, you know what, this isn't captured by essential experience. So that's a common technique that I like to use. Just integrate that constant checking against the essential experience into your process. But one thing I think folks should always remember is you define the essential experience. It doesn't control you. The essential experience, when you write it down, at the start, it's not some unchangeable stone tablet that you're bound to obey. Things do change in game development. You make discoveries as you go through the development process. You find new avenues of fun. You can go back and redefine that experience. Ideally, you're not doing that a lot, and ideally, you're not doing it way late in production or anything. Ideally, you're only doing it in pre-production. But the idea behind ensuring consistency is not to bind your hands to keep you from doing things, but it's to guide them, to make sure that you're making things that do hit that essentially.
I like that. That makes sense. It's a good analogy. The next lens we're going to talk about is the lens of surprise. So why don't you just quickly give me a breakdown of what that means to you, and then kind of how do you incorporate surprise elements into the narrative design and what considerations you may consider when implementing? Just kind of take me through the lens of surprise in your process.
Yeah. So I think you have to identify and know the difference between what is a good surprise in a game and what is a bad surprise in a game. And for me, the key differentiator between good and bad is safety and trust. Humans generally like surprises as long as the surprise doesn't make them feel unsafe. So good surprises increase your feelings of safety, of comfort, of trust, of enjoyment. Bad surprises increase your feelings of danger, of discomfort, of frustration. And when we apply this to a game, that means that the good surprises increase your trust in the experience and the developers. And it may lead to you playing a game longer than you originally planned to. It may lead to you picking up more games by these people because you've learned to trust. Bad surprises decrease trust. And if there's too many, you probably turn the game off. You probably don't even finish it. You probably don't buy another game by those people because you've lost trust in them.
Right.
So when I look at this in terms of narrative design, I'm looking for opportunities to surprise the player that will increase their trust in us and avoid things that will decrease their trust. And one common example in role-playing games and RPGs is an example of a bad surprise is to invalidate the player's choice. If you give the player a quest that is to save a village from a flood, and they do all the work to repair the dam or however they're going to save it from the flood, and they're feeling good, they were a hero, and they come back to the village like, ha ha ha, I've done it, you'll all say, love me, give me rewards and flower necklaces. And you come back and everyone in the village got slaughtered by bandits while you were gone. You're surprised.
Yeah.
It's a bad surprise because you immediately feel like, why did I do all that? I made a choice that it didn't matter. Everything I did didn't matter. You wasted my time. You wasted my effort. They don't trust me anymore. From now on, they're always going to be worried that at any time I'm going to pull some weird bait and switch on them like that. So why should they bother doing any quests? Why should they bother playing my game? There's plenty of other games that don't do that. I'm going to go play them. So that's a bad surprise. I don't always do that. But how can I put a good surprise into the same quest? Let's say it's the same setup. I'm giving the player a quest to save a village from a flood. Let's say I get to the dam I'm going to repair, and there's enemies waiting to stop me, and I'm fighting them, and I win, but all the action and fighting has damaged the dam even more so, and I can't repair it. So, surprise, you can't repair the dam, you have to race back to the village and help them evacuate because there's no stopping it now. They're going to get flooded. There's flaws with this too, but this is overall a better surprise because it didn't invalidate my choices or my efforts. I didn't feel like I wasted my time. I now feel like I get to do something even more heroic and fun. Now I get to race against time back to this village and save everyone, as opposed to sort of being a repairman, I'm tired of a plumber. Like, I'm done. Bye. Now I get to do something even more exciting. So it's a good surprise in that, again, it didn't invalidate my efforts, but it gave me something new and more fun to do as a result of the surprise. It didn't take away from what I'd already done.
Gotcha. Can you think of an example of a game where the surprise element was really effectively integrated, either into gameplay or the story?
Yeah, my example's from Star Wars: The Old Republic, and I do want to warn, it will majorly spoil the class story for the Imperial agent. So, if you haven't played it, you still want to play it, which you can, because the Old Republic is healthy and running, skip this part. The Imperial agent class story was written by the great Alex Freed, and they're are many surprises in that storyline, it being a secret agent storyline. But the one I want to highlight is from chapter 2 of that story. The player is surprised to learn that they've been implanted with code words that lets their handlers control them if they go rogue. The way that Alex chose to reveal this was he used the paraphrase system that BioWare games have, where you get like a little short sentence that you choose from, and then your character says something that's not exactly that sentence, but is typically in line with that sentence. He gave you what you expected to say in your paraphrase, but what you chose was different than what you expected, and it was in line with being mind controlled. So he took that system and he used it in an unexpected way to the advantage of the story he was trying to tell. Now, that's a masterful bit of sort of technological formatting wizardry. But the real point I'm wanting to make here is what Alex chose to do after that. So he's revealed that your character has a kill switch, basically, like people can control you and stop you from achieving your goals if you've gone rogue to the goals of the agency. He did not make you go back and undo everything you've done to this point. He didn't have the handlers like say, now I can control you. You're gonna go undo all those things you did and kill all those people you chose to spare or all of that. He didn't make you do that. Instead, your objective then changed to, now my main goal is to overcome this mind control in my head and then outwit and possibly get revenge on the person who took control of me in the first place. He surprised the player, and then as a result of that surprise, he immediately gave them something new and fun and even more exciting to do. He didn't invalidate their choices.
Right.
He surprised them in a good way. And as a result, players, a lot of people talk that the agent, this is anecdotal, I don't have like an actual, spreadsheet of survey responses or anything, but I have seen a lot of folks in media and stuff compliment the Imperial agent storyline. And I think that is reflective that the choices Alex made generally increased people's trust in him and the story he was telling. And they then became highly motivated to keep playing the agent and see what other good, fun surprises that story was going to have for them. And I love to talk about that example because what he did with the paraphrases still blows my mind to this day. Like,
that's very
cool. And I think if you ask Alex, he would like look at you like, well, it was so obvious. But I still am like, I never would have thought.
That's very clever. I'm curious, do you think part of the reason that would be so successful is because the surprise still honors the player fantasy? Like when you pick that class, you have a player fantasy of being rebellious and strong-willed and trying to break free from the shadows and work in the shadows. Like, so that plays right into that fantasy.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it is also a surprise that reinforces the essential experience of being a secret agent. In the realm of a sci-fi / fantasy place where mind control is a possible thing.
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. Okay, so the next randomly selected lens, because they're completely out of order, is the lens of fun. In my opinion, probably the most important one, at least one of the most important ones. It's the whole idea behind finding the fun. So for you, when you're designing narrative elements, how do you ensure that primary focus remains on creating a fun and engaging experience?
Yeah, I totally agree. It is probably the most important lens when you're making a game. And, that's to my point here that we have to remember that games are play. They play a game. They play is a verb to have fun. And a great story absolutely contributes to fun. But you can experience a great story in all kinds of media, books, TV, film, anything. The games, however, are the only medium that feature interactivity and where you get to be an active participant in helping to tell the story. And so you have to always remember that it needs to be more fun and more interesting than sitting in a theater or holding the remote or flipping a page. So that's sort of my focus on how to get it to be fun and engaging. Remembering that the unique quality of experience the story in games, and always playing to that unique quality and making sure the experience is never equivalent to a more passive storytelling medium. I like to call the player the invisible dev, because this can sound trite, but I do kind of believe it. I don't think any game is really done until you play it, is it? And you give it that final bit of life and meaning and definition through how you choose to play it. And so when I'm doing narrative design for any game, I try to think of the player as the star, the main character, the protagonist, and always keep that idea of the unique quality of storytelling in a game, the interactivity, in my mind. And if you position the player that way in your narrative from the start, if you don't get distracted by all these cool NPCs you're creating and they end up supplanting if you always keep in mind that the player is the hero, that the protagonist, the star, and all the most interesting things should be happening to the player. And if you remember that the player should always feel that element of interactivity, of being an active participant in the story, I find that your focus is going to naturally remain on their experience.
I find your idea of the invisible dev, the extra dev in the room, that's cool, because in theater, there's a similar concept where a play is not actually a completed play until there's an audience. The act of having an audience there is what makes it theater. Like, without that, it's not theater. So it's kind of this, I'm asking, is it same in game development? Like, without somebody to play the game, it's not a game.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And even more so in a game, because like the story can't be told without you. If you don't play it, it just sits there on the menu forever, waiting for someone to play it. You know, in other, you know, let's take the example of theater, and I think that's totally true what you said too. They could still have the play though without you. There won't be any.
Yeah.
There won't be any inner reaction. You know, they won't really know like if they're hitting all the beats they need to, because they're not getting any feedback from the guys. But they could still do it without you to an empty theater, as opposed to, like I said, the game, it literally can't happen without you.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Okay, so I guess I'm curious also, when you're sitting down and you're applying the lens of fun, when you're figuring out how to put fun into a game, do you have any techniques or strategies you use to make sure that the humor, enjoyment, fun is in there without compromising the integrity of the game? And I guess also, how do you find that fun? How do you evaluate, is this idea fun or not?
Well, first of all, I'll say that the idea of needing to balance fun with storytelling is, yep. I don't personally see those at odds with each other, or needing, or the idea of needing to balance between them, because for me, the most fun and entertaining games are the ones that tell good stories and maintain immersion in that story. And I personally think that if you do the latter, you will by default achieve the former, at least to some extent.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when it comes to techniques for getting all that fun into the narrative without compromising it, I think there's a season for everything. First, you have to figure out like what types of humor and fun are appropriate for the context of your game and which are not. Physical Three Stooges like comedy just isn't going to be as successful in a text-based RPG as it will be in a game with mocap cinematics. Yeah. I can describe while poking Curly in the eyes, but it's not going to be funny seeing it. You know, being able to kill anyone in a game at any time can be fun, just running around hacking down NPCs. But if that means you end up killing all your quest givers, and now you're in this empty world with nothing to do, all you've done is trade hours of fun for 5 minutes. It's like, well, I got nothing to do. We're just shut the game off.
Right.
So you have to think through what's appropriate for your game. And, once you've defined it, again, you become sort of shepherds and gatekeepers. You try to bring in the stuff that is appropriate. You try to keep out the stuff that isn't. And, fun, what's funny, sometimes it can be that whole idea of, I can't fight it, but I know it when I see it. But I find that a good strategy is to identify some other existing media that shares context with your game. It could be the setting, it could be the tone, it could be the era, whatever. And you analyze that, and you find how do they do humor and fun effectively. Breaking Bad, it's a very dark show, but there's also funny moments in it, and it has to have some, right? Because you can't be dark without light. You need something every now and then to break it up and ensure that what is dark retains its power. Otherwise, it's gonna lose it. You're gonna become numb to it. It's not gonna hit you like it should. Mm-hmm. And I think lastly here, it's also important to not become too precious, to not think about the integrity of the story too hard or take it too seriously, because it can become dangerous. I think writers can really any creative people, but sometimes particularly writers can get very protective of their work and preserving the vision you have in your head of how your story was supposed to play out. But sometimes you get so focused on that vision that you can't see other versions of it. You can't see emergent ideas for fun and humor and whatnot. And when I'm talking to people who I'm interviewing and when they talk really hard about the integrity of the story or wanting to fight for the story or be the champion of the story, I get a little worried that they're going to get too focused on it and fixated on their vision of it at the expense of the rest of the game. Narrative is just one part of the game. It's one part of telling the story. It's an important part, but everything else in the game tells a story too. And so I always try to encourage people to keep collaboration and flexibility at the top of their brains as opposed to integrity or championing, because I think those two words give you more ability to see possibilities and pivot, and that ultimately can make a more successful narrative than trying to stick rigidly to like your idea of what's integral to the story.
Yes, that's fantastic advice. Have been taking Susan O'Connor's The Narrative Department Masterclass, and at the very beginning, one of the first things we dive into is the story stack concept, and it's fun. We're taking a narrative class, and one of the first things we learn is narrative is the most flexible. The story is the thing that should be changeable above everything else. So like, let go of your precious darlings and just change the story to work with the mechanics or with the concepts or the constraints. It was an interesting lesson.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that the story is the easiest to change. That does not mean when there's a bump in the road or a challenge, you always say the writer will do something, right? Yeah. But it is important to remember that your part of the game is the most flexible, and so it is your responsibility to be open to that flexibility and look for ways to make it work without being a roadblock.
Right on. Okay, so before we move on to the final lens here, really quick, what's fun for you? What do you find most engaging when you're playing?
RPGs are my favorite genre, particularly RPGs where you get to design your own character. And for me, I think again that goes back to like the idea of getting to help tell the story, because I think my favorite thing is telling stories, because I originally I was into writing too, and that's kind of what I was gonna do. I was gonna write, and so writing for video games lets me like marry those two things. I get to tell stories, but I get to do it through video games, which I love playing. And so for me, that's the most fun thing, when I can feel like I'm getting to tell the story with the developers. And that's why my favorite games growing up were things like the BioWare games and the Quest for Glory. If you haven't played that series, I love that series so much. In that series, you get to choose whether you're a fighter or a magic user or a thief, and the stories can get very different based on which one you chose, and your solutions to problems are different based on which one you were, and there's different people you can romance and befriend and all sorts of stuff. And I just love that idea that the way I played the game is almost always going to be different for how you played the game, and we're not experiencing the same game. It's unique to us as people, and that for me is the most fun. But again, that can apply to any kind of game, not just RPGs. You can apply it to Pong. I play Pong versus when you play Pong. Do I move it really fast just to make sure you're not going to get me, or am I that kind of slow methodical person, or do I not move it until the dot is getting closer? That's what I love. That's what I'm fun, where you could choose your approach.
That's cool. A good counterpoint to the lens of fun is the lens of challenge, is looking for challenge. So what approaches do you take when you're trying to provide meaningful challenges in the narrative design that keep people engaged without getting frustrated?
Yeah. For me, challenges within the context of narrative design, that translates to the choices I let the player make and their consequences. That's a challenge in terms of narrative needs to be, where the choices I let you make are their consequences. Rule number one for me is any choice you offer the player has to justify its own existence. There is no point to offering a choice just for choice's sake, by which I mean the choices should all be distinct from each other and ideally have different outcomes, even if it's as simple as the NPC said something different before moving on. Yeah. There has to be some kind of difference that made this choice worth offering. And, I think we've all seen game announcements or things over the years where someone will say, I'm going to make a game where the player could do anything. And I think what invariably happens, other than discovering nobody has the budget or time to do such a thing, they also discover that most of anything isn't worth the effort of making it. Just because it's a choice doesn't mean it's a fun or interesting choice.
Yep.
And to speak about Baldur's Gate 3, which I am still very slowly working through playing, but I'm enjoying, I think Baldur's Gate 3 did a remarkable job of coming as close as anyone to recreating the experience of an actual D&D session with Dungeon Master, where because you're just saying things, you can really do generally anything you want, and the Dungeon Master just has to react and then respond on the fly. But that's not really what's happening in Baldur's Gate 3, right? Designers thought through every single choice you make in that game, and they weighed every single one by whether it was worth the effort of including it and supporting it and building all of the assets that went into it. And there's probably many choices that were on the table that ended up getting cut because they just were not fun or interesting choices and did not justify their own existence. They weren't worth the effort to make.
Right.
So when we are approaching choices or challenges, as I equate them in narrative design, we do it with a lot of forethought and planning. We try to map them out before we build them, so we know where each choice is going to take the player, and we can decide early on, is this choice worth the effort? Is it going to be fun and interesting? Do we want to build it out, or is this choice not worth the effort? We're not going to offer it because of that.
Can you think of an example of a game besides Baldur's Gate 3, maybe something you've worked on where that consideration for challenge heavily impacted the overall player experience?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier a game I did at Disruptor being called Game of Thrones Ascent.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise of that game was that you were the head of a minor noble house that was sworn to one of the great houses, Stark, Lannister, Baratheon, etc. And so one of the very first choices you made upon starting the game was which of these great houses are you sworn? And that choice made then a massive difference in how the game played out for you from there and what kinds of choices were available to you. If you swore the Lannisters, you were always trying to gain and achieve power no matter what. If you swore the Targaryens, you were keeping that a secret because at the start of Game of Thrones, all the Targaryens are supposed to be dead and Baratheons were in charge. And you were always doing your best to keep hope alive that someday Daenerys was going to come back and take the throne. Now, doing that was a lot of work. But we planned it all out in advance, and we decided these are all valid, interesting paths to take, and they are worth the effort of doing because they're going to give the player a lot of interesting choices and challenges. And the houses we launched with are not all of the great houses that exist. Now, we could have used all of them just for the sake of saying, you could choose from all of the great houses. But they wouldn't have been equally worthy of the player's time and effort or of our time to develop them. At the time, we launched right between seasons 1 and 2 of the show. And so at the time, we looked at all the houses, and even though, we knew Martell, Tyrell, Aaron, and Tully existed, but in seasons 1 and 2, they then showed up, really. They hadn't done anything yet. So at the time, we were like, well, let's just launch with Stark, Lannister, Baratheon, Targaryen, Greyjoy, because these are the ones we can see, and we know you have lots of cool choices you can make, and they're worth the effort. Later on, as seasons came out and we saw what they were doing with the others, we added some of the other ones as DLC, but that's an example of how we evaluated all our options. We only picked the ones that we knew were going to give the player fun and interesting choices and challenges, and we cut the other ones, at least until there was new information that then justified their existence.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah. I kind of a spin-off, and there may not be an answer to this question, but I'm curious. In a video game, there's usually mechanical ways to adjust the challenge, the difficulty based on player skill and experience and how the player's playing it. But when it comes to narrative design, are there ways to adjust the difficulty level, the challenge level, based on the player's input, their skill, their knowledge, their ability? Can that be done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I interpret difficulty level in narrative to mean two things. The accessibility of a choice and player comprehension of that choice. And in general, we always try to pace those two things in time with overall game progression. I don't ever want to present a choice that the player doesn't have the context for yet, because how can I expect them to make an effective decision? So to take an example from a BioWare game, it didn't work on it, but let's say within the first few hours of Mass Effect 1, you were asked to decide what to do with the Geth. You know nothing about the Geth at that point. All you've done is see them, putting people on sticks. So it's almost not a choice, right? Why wouldn't I wipe all these people out?
Right.
Then again, scary monsters who are putting human colonists on sticks. What? How is this even a choice? So that's a weird thing to do. So we try to look for things like that, to present this in the proper context. Another thing we try to watch for is how we gate choices. Now, what I mean by that is you've seen dialogue options that are I have to have this much strength or this much persuasion or whatever to be able to do this. I have to have the force persuade ability to be able to choose this. I don't want to give you a choice early on that requires you to have maxed out diplomacy, because it's impossible for you to have maxed out diplomacy in the first couple hours of the game. If I do that, I'm just taunting you. There's no way you can ever do this. So we try to, again, pace those things in concert with overall game progression, reserve it for later, when you might have at least had the opportunity to fill that stat, even if you chose not to, you there's at least a chance you could have.
Right.
So that's sort of how we balance our idea of difficulty level in narrative. We try to keep it generally on par with the difficulty levels in terms of other aspects of it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Kind of obvious now that you pointed out to me. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Well, no, I think it's a great question because, yeah, like you said, when you first think about it, you're like, look, there's some difficulty around here. We just read it. But if you look at it that way, that it's just sort of like an indirect thing we're trying to follow with the rest of the
100%. Okay, well, that kind of wraps up the first round of looking at lenses. Before we start heading out the door, I have a question that I like to ask everybody, no matter what interview I'm doing, because it's kind of what lives at the heart of this whole podcast social experiment thing I'm doing. So bear with me, I get a little weird here. In my opinion, there's a magical space where game writers, designers, board game designers, comic book writers, actors, improv, all these people can come together and we all share something that allows us to sit down at the table and hang out and talk and just relax and be with each other. In your opinion, if there was a magical thread that held all this together, what would that be?
I think it's the need to be heard. If we didn't have that need, we'd never share our work, right? It would just sit in a drawer or our computers or whatever medium we're working in, and we'd be satisfied with just the act of creation alone. But we aren't, right? We need to share it. We need people to hear us. And somehow it's that act of sharing it that somehow makes it real, that makes it done. That satisfies the urge we had to create in the first place. It's not the act of creation that satisfies that urge, which is weird. It's once we share it and other people know it exists, that satisfies it. So that's what I think is what holds us all together.
That's a great answer. That's really good. I guess my follow-up would be, well, in your opinion, why are stories important then, and storytellers to you? Why are stories important to you?
Yeah. Stories, to me, they're what make us human. We're the only creatures on Earth that wonder why. Why does this happen? For animals, existence might as well be like a random series of events. Animals don't wonder why. They don't think about cause and effect. But for humans, everything that happens to us has meaning. And if we can't find any, we have this like burning urge to make some up or find it. If we can't find it, we make it up. To use an example, I have over here a deck of tarot cards, and I'm not hugely into astrology, but I had a coworker who made her own deck, and I loved her art, and I wanted to support her, so I bought it. And every now and then, if I'm procrastinating, I will pull them out and I'll do a little reading. And she had a little book that tells you what every card should mean. And I'll find myself like stringing those meanings together, like and making a story out of them and applying them to past, present, future events in my life, usually in a way that means something positive for me. Because the alternative that everything that happens to us is just as random as pulling one of these cards out of this box. It is just like overwhelming. Like our brains cannot handle the idea of none of this means anything and anything can happen at any time and there's no way to control anything. And so I think stories are a way of like making sense of things and bringing order to that frightening idea of chaos of Brendan.
I would totally agree. That's a fantastic way of looking at it. Okay, so before we head out the door, I do a quick fire round, just top of the mind answers. We may wander down the rabbit hole or not. It's completely up to you, but what are you currently playing?
So I have 2 young kids, 5 and 9. So ever since I became a mom, my gaming habits have changed. I used to spend most of my gaming time doing the big epic RPGs like Baldur's Gate 3. But these days, it's very hard to find time to like sit for several uninterrupted hours in front of a console or a PC. So I do still try and play the Baldur's Gate 3s of the world, if for work, if nothing else. But I'm going very slowly through them because I can kind of only play them at night after everybody's gone to bed. I can squeeze in an hour before I myself pass out. So what I do play more often are things that I can more easily pick up and put down and are suited to like shorter play sessions. Another game series I love growing up was Civilization. So I've been playing Humankind ever since that one came out. I really like Humankind. Still like Civ too, but I like Humankind. I also played The Sims. I've played The Sims since it came out in '99, and I one day calculated how much money I spent on every iteration of The Sims with the 10 expansion packs that come out for everyone, and it was very depressing how much money I spent on the
But don't ask that.
Well, yeah, he was like, I'm never doing this again. I don't want to know. I'm ARMY, which means I'm a fan of the Korean band BTS. And they have mobile games. And they have this little game called BTS Island. And it's a match 3 game where the band is stranded on the island. You try to rescue them. And it has a little story. And every time you beat X number of puzzles, you did advance the story. You're helping to save the band and you're back to their concert. So I play that too on my phone. So yeah, I'm more of a casual gamer these days by necessity and fighting to continue to get through the bigger games. But once my kids get a little more older and independent, I'm hoping to spend more of my time on those big games again. But yeah, doing the best I can while they're little.
Yeah, no, kids do that. Like, yeah, mine are now old enough that I can go back to the big games, but yeah, they eat up your time, that's for sure. They're wonderful. Don't get me wrong.
I love them.
Yes, very much. Because they'll listen to this later, I love them very much. What are you currently reading? What's on the nightstand or the bookshelf?
I am a NASA nerd, if you could see it. I love real world space travel, and I got this book for Christmas called Space Shuttle Stories. And it's a recap of every shuttle mission ever flown with stories from all the astronauts who were on those missions. And it's fascinating. I think the space program and the mindset of everybody in it is so inspirational to me. You know, it's just thousands of people working silently, quietly on projects that most people don't know or care about. And a lot of their projects stand to get canceled or do get canceled. And at the moment, a lot of the projects they work on are very long term, like they might not even be alive to see the ultimate fulfillment of them. And there's a lot of crossover there with the game industry. So I just find them so inspirational. I wish I had an ounce of their fortitude. I don't, when things get canceled, I get a lot more upset than they do. But you know, and I keep trying. I read about them and I aspire to be like them.
There you go. What's the best advice you've ever received? And this could be career advice or it could just be life advice.
I think the best advice I've ever received is less is more. Less is more. And that's advice I've gotten in many forms from many people over the years. But in terms of game writing, it really got hammered home to me during the year that I spent in mobile gaming. It was a real culture shock to go from BioWare, where you can write and write and write and write. Like they had at the time informal competitions between projects on how many words were in them. Like we had this thing on the wall that was like Mass Effect this many words. Oh yeah, Dragon Age this many words. Yeah, the Old Republic this many words. And you go from that to Zynga, where it was quite literally, you have 30 characters to tell this story. Not line, not word, character. And that includes the space. And you learn what is essential to story very quickly under those conditions. And I looked back at, some of the work I did before mobile, and I'm still proud of it, but all of a sudden, it was like I put glasses on for the first time and I could just see, I just went on and on and on, and I could have said the same thing in 5 words, and I could see how I made life harder for many people. So like cinematic designers and VO actors and directors, all because I was worried, these lines are too short, they're too simple, they're not my brilliance is not coming forth. You know? And in reality, like, the shorter and simpler, the better. It helps everybody. And in the end, it all comes back around and you look brilliant because it was better, you know. So yeah, less is more. The irony being, I just use a lot of words to say that words are only part of the experience. Use only as many as you need so that there's room for everything else that goes into telling the story in a game.
Okay, last one. If you could sit down and have a game, any 4 people, living or dead, from any time in history, who would it be and what would you play?
So I really just want to sit down with the designers of all those games I love from my childhood. I want to sit down with Lori and Corey Cole, who did the Quest for Glory series, which is still my favorite game series ever. Roberta Williams, King's Quest, and on everything. And I know this is cheating because that makes technically 5, but the 2 guys for Andromeda who did Space Quest. I just want to sit down with all of them, and I don't necessarily want to play a game, but I want to do like a day-long hackathon or game jam, which I think is kind of like playing a game.
Yeah.
And we could build something together, and I could just soak up all their knowledge and fangirl on them. I think that would be really fun for me. And hopefully it would be somewhat fun for them, but it would definitely be fun for me.
That sounds like a good day. Before I close up shop here, I would love to give you the final words. So, first of all, is there anything you're working on that you can talk about or anything you just want to promote? And then take us out with a final word of wisdom or a closing thought, or the mic is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you so much again for having me, including me in this roster of great people. To listeners, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope I've given you some useful or at least entertaining insight. If you want to know more about my current role and project, you can Google Something Wicked Games and Weird Song. You can also listen to the earlier episodes with Will Shannon and Jeff Gardner, who are also at the company. Of the games that I've worked on, Star Wars The Old Republic, Star Trek Timelines, Archer Danger Phone, and SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off are all still live and all free to play. So you can check out any or all of those. Do you mind if I recommend like a companion podcast? And it ended 3 years ago, so it's not really a competitor. But
I'm one of those people who believe rising tides raise all boats, so I promote other podcasts all the time. So go for it.
Okay. I want to recommend a companion podcast to this one. It's Anthony Johnston's podcast, Writing and Breathing. It's not game focused, but it is writing focused. Anthony has written for many games you know and love, like Dead Space and Shadow Warrior and Resident Evil. And on the podcast, he interviews writers for all different kinds of media. He interviews poets, he interviews novelists, he interviews game writers, he interviews people, editors and publishing, all sorts of things. And he talks them about their processes and the unique pros and cons and quirks of the types of writing they do. And it's just a great listen if you're a writer or an aspiring writer. Just like I think learning more about game design in general makes you a better narrative designer, I think learning more about writing in general, all kinds of writing, makes you a better writer. And the podcast ended 3 years ago, and I really wish Anthony would do more of it. So maybe if you all go listen to it and bother him, he won't like it.
Sounds like a plan. Well, as we draw the curtains on another evening's conversation, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Jessica for sharing her invaluable insights into the art of game design. And thank you, dear listener, for joining in as we examined 4 of the interesting lenses used in game design. May your stories be rich, your games immersive, and your designs crystal clear. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop by the Corner of Story and Game.